Hi there IndyCar fans, welcome back to today's episode of IndyCar on the 2nd of October. Now, with so little news that you can actually really talk about, which has anything at all to do with independence, I thought it might be worth having a different type of programme today and look at what it takes for a country such as Scotland, or in fact any other country which is in the middle of some kind of existential struggle for its survival. How do they choose an effective, inspirational, charismatic leader? Well, the answer to this is not all that simple. But first of all, we have to decide on something. We are traditionally, I suppose, used to having our leaders being politicians. At the moment, we have Humza Yousaf, who's the leader of the SNP, and also the First Minister of Scotland. Before that, we had Nicola Sturgeon. Before her, we had Alex Salmond. Now, all three of these people are politicians, and in common with each other, they are limited in what they can actually say and do by the oath that they took when they entered Holyrood. Holyrood being effectively the British arm, or the Scottish arm, if you like, Scottish arm of the British government in Scotland. And it means that politicians, professional politicians in parties, can't do certain things. No matter how charismatic and how inspirational they are, they have to be able to step outside the political arena and step outside of the political constraints in order to lead any kind of movement towards a goal such as independence. Now, the type of people who make good leaders are obviously ones who do inspire both loyalty, enthusiasm, who are well respected, speak the truth, etc., etc., which is fine in its own way. The problem again is that such people in political parties, particularly in Scotland and most especially in Holyrood, are limited by a glass ceiling. There are certain things they simply cannot talk about, simply certain things they cannot even propose as policies or government strategies, anything which might threaten the overall dominion of the United Kingdom and its precious union. So how do we go about picking a leader for a new independence push? Well, if you take a think back to the days in 2014, when the independence movement, as we now recognise it, I suppose, was actually born, the man chosen to lead it, and I'm still trying to remember who it was who actually came up with this particular person as the person to lead it, was a chap called Blair Jenkins. Now, some of you, maybe as old as me, will remember Mr. Jenkins. A rather tall, lugubrious looking chap who was a professional, or a media professional in his own right, a lot of experience, very charming, very erudite, rather cadaverous looking, and I think, having someone like Blair Jenkins as the leader of a movement was a little bit of a misstep. I know it's easy to look back on these things in hindsight and say, well, that was wrong. However, choosing Mr. Jenkins in his role, as the leader, if you like, of the independence yes movement was a little bit of a misstep, because he was seen very largely almost like a businessman or an undertaker. He had that sort of air and gravitas about him, which made him very serious looking, but not very inspiring. And most of the inspiration, which actually manifested itself in the yes movement, was self-generated in groups and individuals, and of course other connected hubs and so on within the movement. And I honestly felt that Mr. Jenkins was, from my point of view, and this is just my own opinion, a little anticlimactic. If you look at choosing a leader for a national struggle like this from the viewpoint of, say, political philosophy, the most successful leaders when it comes to national struggles for liberation are not usually politicians. If you take the most recent example that I can think of, let's say we look at the leader of Ukraine at the moment, President Zelensky. He was an actor. He was a comedian, a comedy actor, who pretended in this TV show that he was the president of Ukraine. And yet, he's become the most popular figure in Ukraine. He has turned out, ironically, to be an excellent wartime leader. a man who's respected, who can speak the truth, who can be honest, who is allowed to show his emotions and can be passionate about what he's saying. But he's not a politician, and he's not a member of a political party per se, and yet highly respected across the globe, has massive allies across the West in Ukraine's existential struggle to survive the onslaught of the Russian invasion. Now, we obviously are not facing a Russian invasion. Some 317 years ago, we were invaded, and hordes of tens of thousands of English troops were stationed here to make sure that we didn't rise up again. There was, of course, a very famous uprising which is never spoken about in 1820, a popular uprising in Scotland, a radical uprising which almost is never spoken about. But leadership in such things is essential, because in order to enthuse people and bring them to a cause, they need a leader who is able to speak the truth. Now, politicians, a good politician doesn't need to speak the truth all the time. In fact, being a politician will require whoever that is to lie occasionally in the sort of the pursuit of the greater good. And we know that politicians can say a lot of things without lying, simply by omitting them. But a good politician is a person who can win elections. A good politician is somebody who can win high office in their own party, somebody who is obviously aggressively, what would we say, ambitious. But that's not really the right kind of person to lead a country in an existential struggle for its own survival, for its own identity, and for its independence from a larger, more aggressive state which is subduing you. What we need is somebody from outside of politics to do that. Now, the reason we would pick someone like that is because a person who's not a politician, who's not sworn an oath to anybody, is able to tell the truth all the time, is able to be honest, and will inspire loyalty, will inspire enthusiasm, and will inspire respect from everybody in the nation who looks at that person as the figurehead of the movement, simply because they're not a politician. And that is something I think we forget in our little crucible, our little bubble of British political limitations here in Scotland, that in order to step outside of that, we don't want to pick our leader from political parties. Take, for example, Mr. Salmond. Now, we all know that Alex Salmond, before he was smeared and taken to court, had his show trial, and all the lurid details about the alleged offences were spread all over the media in the most prejudicial way possible by the United Kingdom state media. Before all of that, he had great respect, and he was looked up to by many, probably millions of Scots, who saw him as an able politician and charismatic leader and all the rest of it. By the time the United Kingdom and its media and the Scottish judiciary and the police had finished with him, his entire brand, his entire image was tainted. And I was listening to the two Davies the other day on their channel, and they were talking about the fact that Mr. Salmond has now effectively lost about half of the Scottish electorate, the female half, who think that he's now creepy, that his reputation as a human being has been tarnished by this process. He may well have been perhaps a little more touchy-feely. He was a man of a different era, if you like, and perhaps that was true. But he certainly was found innocent on every charge bar one, which was not proven. So he never committed a crime. However, he has been effectively neutralised by the United Kingdom and its media. Nicola Sturgeon, likewise. As soon as she had gone to the Supreme Court and they said, no, you can't have an independence referendum, and then she retired, basically stepped aside probably before she was forced out, she now is effectively sidelined. But not only is she sidelined, but she's subject to a constant barrage of accusations and innuendos. This police investigation into the top 3 people in the SNP and alleged offences, alleged misappropriation or misuse of funds, in which there's not been any evidence found so far by Police Scotland in this enormously long so-called investigation. She's been effectively neutralised as well. So anyone who has any kind of dealings inside a political party is obviously, as the leader of that party of independence, is going to be targeted by that type of smear campaign. If you choose a leader who is not a politician, but someone perhaps from, from maybe online media, but somebody else, maybe somebody from the entertainment industry, somebody from sport, someone from business, but someone charismatic, someone who can speak well, who is honest, truthful about their own aspirations, truthful about what they want for Scotland, and is prepared to make sure that what is being proposed by the parties, supposedly of independence, actually produces a self-executing result. In other words, a referendum which self-executes, the result of which is independence. That kind of leader needs to have a lot of heft, a lot of respect, and if he or she can command the support of millions of fellow independent supporters in Scotland, that puts intolerable pressure on the remaining politicians who are stuck in the unionist bubble, who can't escape, who are not allowed to say that they'll hold a referendum for fear of meeting the same fate as Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. Humza Yousaf has already been targeted in the same way, but for different reasons. Nicola Sturgeon's still being pursued over things which never happened, like why did she delete her WhatsApp messages? Nicola Sturgeon never had WhatsApp, and she didn't have any messages to delete, and yet these kind of lies permeate the entire United Kingdom media space. So we need someone who's not a politician, someone who is an open book, someone who's transparent, whose entire life is quite well known, and whose aspirations for independence are purely from the point of view of righting a historic wrong. We don't have to convince people of why they would be better off financially with independence, how they would get more benefits with independence, how Scotland could make better decisions, how it could rejoin the European Union or EFTA. We don't need to tell anybody that. That is self-evident. If you're a country in your own right and you have all the levers of power and all the powers of a normal country, you can do anything you like with it. Anything that your population votes for. However, you can't do that when you're living within the political bubble constructed like a fishbowl by the United Kingdom to keep Scotland's pro-independence politicians from escaping and doing something drastic, like suggesting holding a referendum which is self-executing, which results then in the United Kingdom ending and Scotland becoming independent. However, somebody outside the political sphere, they could do this. There are a lot of reasons why I think that, first of all, there needs to be an actual independence referendum, because without that, there can't be this kind of movement and there wouldn't be that sort of leadership. Alex Salmond, in his own time, when he wrote the Edinburgh Agreement and got David Cameron to sign it, which made that referendum in 2014 binding, meant that there could be a focused campaign, a public campaign, where the leader of that campaign was not a politician. It was Blair Jenkins. Now, as I say, I disagreed with the choice of Blair Jenkins. With all due respect to the man, he's a very able and competent individual, but he seemed to lack the charisma that a leader needs. So I guess what I'm saying to you is you need someone who can speak to the movement in its own language and who can make the politicians actually do what the electorate wants, what the majority of the Scottish people want them to do, simply by bringing all of these people out on the streets on the same day, making sure that it becomes so embarrassing for the Scottish politicians to keep saying, no, we can't have a referendum, we're really sorry, it's illegal, blah, 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 to actually say, all right, we will have that referendum, we will stage it, we'll dissolve Holyrood, and all of the pro-independence elected officials will sit somewhere outside of Holyrood, take that decision on behalf of the majority of the voters who elected them in the first place, hold the referendum, And that is when the clock starts ticking, and this is when that new leader would be needed. But we don't have one at the moment. There are many people in the frame for this. Somebody has mentioned Leslie Riddoch. I'm not sure about Leslie Riddoch, whether she would be willing to accept that type of responsibility and that huge role. There are probably other people in the frame as well. I'm sure many of you could name a few individuals that you would want to see taking on that role, who might be able to pull all the disparate threads of the Scottish independence movement back together again and knit it into a more coherent fabric that can actually campaign as we did in 2014. But I don't know who that person might be. However, that is a key element which must be in place, as well as a self-executing referendum. These are the two things that must happen in order for us to have any kind of chance at breaking the chains that bind us to the United Kingdom, to the British state. If this doesn't happen, and to be honest with you, I think next year is looking very much like an anticlimactic damp squib in terms of political achievements. Yes, we'll get the SNP back. They will probably be the party of government. They will probably get a decent majority. They may well ask for negotiations with the UK, which are then refused. They may then demand a Section 30, which will be refused. And then what happens next? Nothing much, really. We'll have a pro-independence government inside the Westminster globe of influence that prevents them from holding a referendum. So someone somewhere needs to say, right, let's get this movement going. Maybe we can put the movement before the referendum is actually even talked about, because we need to find a way of putting sufficient pressure on the politicians that it becomes, to use their own terminology, untenable for them to sit on their backsides in the middle of the fence and say, oh, we can't really do anything about it because of the Supreme Court in England says we're not allowed to. You just need to step outside the British fishbowl and have that Parliament sit elsewhere in a different form, under the sovereignty of the actual people themselves, whose constitution guarantees that, and which is a part or a precondition of this Treaty of Union that we are allegedly in already. So there's so many things that could be done, but actually getting the movement together to find a leader might be a good starting point, because if we can find a figure that we can rally behind who's prepared to take this on, it would be a massive step forward. Even if we don't have a referendum yet, if we can bind this movement back together again and actually force our own politicians to stop mucking about and pretending that they're going to try and get independence using a general election to do it, and actually say, yeah, if we win this next general election, we are going to hold the referendum. And there will be a self-executing referendum. None of this advisory stuff, no Edinburgh agreements, no British interference in the way it's run. That's a big ask. But if you've got a big leader who has no political irons in the fire and no political skeletons lurking in the cupboard, then why not try it? What have we got to lose? That's my question to you today. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the subject matter for today's programme in the absence of any positive news from any of our politicians. And I've covered a few bizarre stories in the last few days concerning the Greens and the independence of Shetlanders, amongst other things. We need somebody. We need someone who will actually pull us all together, not party politically, but just as people. People who want independence don't really care about party politics like me. I don't really give a rat's ass about party politics. I simply want the historic wrong, the crime that was perpetrated on the Scottish people without their consent in any way, shape or form in 1707 to be fixed. And that just simply means taking back what we've already got and asserting ourselves, our own sovereignty, our ability to hold a referendum if we want. What are they going to do to you? You're going to hold a referendum under your own constitutional laws. You can already mention, when you start to organise this referendum, you can reach out to international bodies, courts in other countries, higher courts, far higher courts than the Supreme Court of England, and actually say, listen, what we're going to do. Will you support the outcome if we have this vote, and we vote yes, and it's self-executing? Will you recognise the new Scottish state? Because when you've got that support, what's England going to do about it? They're going to look pretty stupid if they try and stop it, which they might. I mean, if they took the drastic step of going down the route of Spain and actually brutalising the population as they tried to cast their votes in ballot boxes and ran about beating grannies with sticks, how's that going to look in the international arena? Who's going to want to trade with a brutal, authoritarian, repressive dictatorship like that? Nobody, right? Anyway, I shall leave you with these thoughts. That's it from IndyCar today. Keep the faith, but keep thinking. See if you can come up with any ideas for possible leaders for a non-party political independence movement. And let's see if we can exert some real pressure on the parties in Holyrood to stop sitting on the fence and being so terrified of what England might say or do to them if they actually said, yes, we'll have a referendum if everybody provides us with a mandate at the next general election. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now.